It's Brigitte Cutshall with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is the amazing Scott Stirrett. He is the author of The Uncertainty Advantage, an entrepreneur, and he also helps younger people. Can you say hi, Scott?
Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
I appreciate you reaching out and being a guest. You have, I should say, amazing background. You have a very good background because you had to be yourself. My understanding, you had a worked for Goldman Sachs back in the day after you got out of college, and you just felt trapped, basically, right? And you were trapped because of multiple reasons, but you had the bravery to leave that. And my understanding, you're also from Canada, and so you left that. Can you share what prompted all this? You had this inner voice talking to you to move forward, right?
When I was 22, I first had the idea to launch Venture for Canada, which is a national not-for-profit that has helped over 10,000 young people be entrepreneurial across the country. And around at the same time, I started working at Goldman Sachs. And while I was at Goldman Sachs, I was doing work that ultimately wasn't aligned with what my skills were, what my interests were. I had never worked in finance. I didn't study finance. I had gotten in a job at Goldman Sachs through a lot of persistence, but it was more what I felt was society kind of putting its expectations on me rather than what I actually wanted for myself. And while I was working at Goldman Sachs, I reflected a lot like, what am I good at? What am I interested in? And the more that I started working on Venture for Canada, the more I realized that what the bigger risk was me staying at Goldman Sachs and ultimately working in a career that wasn't aligned with my skills and interests. So I took the plunge and I founded Venture for Canada. It's been 11 years since then.
That's amazing, and that's very brave of you. Because you learned some things, I'm assuming, from working there. You saw things. And I agree with you how when you out of college, you kind of get pressured into you got to do a certain thing. And I had that too. But I didn't go back to Canada because I'm not from Canada. I'm sorry, I'm being funny. But so you were very uncertain. How long were you at Goldman Sachs to get this?
I was at Goldman Sachs for around a year. And to double click on what you were saying earlier, when I went to school, college in the US at Georgetown, and at Georgetown, there was a huge path from there to going to work on Wall Street or at big consulting firms. And I interviewed initially for an internship at Goldman Sachs on campus at Georgetown. I got it. And then I ended up getting a full-time job offer from Goldman Sachs. And then I accepted it and went there full time. But it was very much this sort of super highway from Georgetown to finance. And I felt like I just was, following the motions. And I wasn't necessarily reflecting, like, what do I actually want to do with my life?
And how can you, right, make an impact? Is probably what you were thinking as well.
Yeah, I think making an impact and also all of us are different. So for some people, going to work at Goldman Sachs is like the dream job and it's an amazing kind of path for them. For me, where I love entrepreneurship, I love building things, I love meeting with really wide range of different people. I love a lot of freedom in terms of like my time. Going to work at Goldman Sachs was not aligned with, I would say, my interests, my skill sets, and entrepreneurship is something at the core is a way better fit for me. But the main thing I want listeners to know is that it's also okay if you want to go work at a big bank. Like for some people,
Correct.
that is the right fit, but it's about reflecting of like, what is the career that is the right fit for you and your interests?
That's true. And but it's you listen to yourself and you probably had some, I don't know, unexpected pressure as well working at the bigger corporations. There's a lot of pressure. Because I worked some bigger corporations too, not at Goldman Sachs, but I understand that pressure of the expectations they have of you. And I think it's a great experience for you though. You learned from it and you learned probably how to raise money, right?
I don't think I could have ever founded Venture for Canada and been successful at it if I hadn't worked at Goldman Sachs, even though it was only for a year, because working at Goldman Sachs taught me a lot of basic fundamental like life skills. Like I graduated from college and it was my first time living independently and like keeping an intense work schedule and just be like learning how to operate in like the real like business world. I will always be grateful for Goldman Sachs at that. And there were a lot of great things I gained from that experience. So I am really glad that I did not create Venture for Canada immediately out of school.
Right. You, at least you, it just happened for a reason. And I think that you are pointing out my understanding that the career playbook is different these days now, right? Is that the right word? There's a advantage and disadvantages to the current career playbook. Like it would work for some people to work at Goldman Sachs, but I would be terrible at it. But because I'm one of those, I like to be creative, and I don't know if you could be Goldman Sachs.
I think there's some room for creativity, but especially at junior levels, I would say not really. Like you're a cog in the machine.
Mhm.
And for me, I just felt like I was wasting my time. And I've always been attuned to like life is very short. I think when you're 22, a lot of people aren't attuned to that, but I don't know. For me, I've always been a little bit aware of my own mortality. And I reflected on, okay, do I want to waste 10 years here and I'm not happy and it's not teaching me new things? So some people thought a year was not very long to stay at Goldman Sachs, but I think in the whole scheme of things, like I'm really glad that I actually 1 year was like the perfect amount of time to spend because I got a lot of the foundational skills, but I didn't stay too long and waste too much time.
And was this, I'm assuming, in New York, right?
It was, yeah. I worked in when I was working full time, I worked at the headquarters in New York City.
Oh, wow. That's me. I'm like, wow, I'm impressed. It's a big deal what you did, but you learned it wasn't a fit for you. In your note, one of your notes to me, I guess, kind of it was like you mentioned the coming out of two closets. I'm sorry, I'm bringing this up.
Yeah.
And one of them was that corner office at Goldman Sachs, and the other one closet was coming out was your sexuality, and that was never public before that, right? I'm assuming.
Yeah, a little to a few people before, but
Yeah.
essentially I was coming out of the closet and creating Venture for Canada at the same time. And I first came out of the closet and to some people at the very end of college, but I hadn't come out to kind of everybody. And essentially, as I started coming out to more and more people, I gained more of the confidence to say, "Hey, I'm going to throw the
Right.
dice and go
Right.
create this Venture for Canada." And the reason I share this is I think that the more that you're comfortable with like who you are, the more you accept, more than accept, the more that you embrace who you are as a person, the more that you are, I think, willing to like take risks and bet on yourself. And for me, coming out of the closet was directly correlated with betting on myself and going to leave Goldman Sachs to go create a not-for-profit.
I also see it as you're being a good leader. It's growing your leadership skills as well because you're showing that you can do this. And it wasn't easy. I'm pretty sure it was not easy. But you still did it and you were being compassionate to yourself.
Yeah, the first couple of years of Venture for Canada were really tough. Like it was hit and miss. Like we were about to run out of money at many, many, many points, and it would just required like sheer force of will for Venture for Canada to survive. In many ways, it's remarkable that Venture for Canada like got off the ground and we were able to raise $80 million and
Wow.
support 10,000 people and get to the scale that we are today. But through it, when I reflected the early days of Venture for Canada, I had very little self-compassion. Like I just was so hard on myself, and sometimes still am. But in the journey of doing VFC over the last 11 years, I've really come to appreciate that with all the uncertainty out there in the world, having compassion for yourself. And I can talk about that later, but what that means, it's one of the most important things that you need to do in order to thrive in an uncertain world.
That's true. And it's kind of, I think I'm one of those people guilty of being like trying to be perfect on everything. And that kind of holds you back. You don't want to move forward. right? You're just want everything to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be. And that helps show other people that it's okay, right? You started, I mean, this is amazing what you did, this venture for Canada, and it focuses on helping other entrepreneurs, correct?
Yeah, we help young people in Canada be more entrepreneurial through almost a half a dozen different programs. And yeah, it's core to my own personal mission statement, which is to help others achieve their full potential. But yeah, it's been an amazing journey and grateful to have had the opportunity to support so many people in their own entrepreneurial journeys.
And I think a lot of people need that support. I mean, emotionally, right? Not just financially, but you're giving them you're a good role model. You have the experience, even though it was 1 year at Goldman Sachs, you understand how to, I guess you're surrounding yourself with the right people, correct? And my understanding too, you're the author of a book called The Uncertainty Advantage. What prompted you to want to write a book? What is it about?
I think that the defining aspect of our era is the amount of uncertainty that we all live with, whether it's political uncertainty or technological uncertainty with the rise of like AI. We are living in a world that is radically more uncertain than it was even in the 1990s. And the most important thing that everyone needs to learn to thrive in our current world is how to lean in and embrace the chaos and the uncertainty because we can't choose the amount of uncertainty that's out there in the world, but we can choose how we respond to it. And the great thing is that uncertainty and your toleration of uncertainty is something that is a learned skill. You can learn to embrace the chaos over time. And what motivated me to write this book is that I've supported almost 10,000 people to launch their careers across the country. And I've seen that fear of uncertainty is one of the main things that holds people
Ah,
back.
yeah.
And in my own life experience, I've seen at moments where I've loved uncertainty, like when I left Goldman Sachs to go create Venture for Canada. But I've also seen, like during COVID, when I became so afraid of everything and developed really high levels of anxiety. So I was partially motivated to write this book because it's a book I wish that it existed when I was younger.
That's a good point. There's a lot of anxiety, especially you brought up the word COVID. That freaked a lot of people out. I shouldn't say freaked, but it did because it was uncertain of what's going to happen, right? And I try to embrace it the way I can. Like you said, responding to situations is how you respond. Excuse me. I try not to be angry, right? I mean, I'm not perfect, right? I have learned that I just think writing a book like this is going to help so many people. And so do you share like stories from other people or is it just, I'm assuming just yours?
I share some stories from other people, but a lot of the stories are my own personal experiences with uncertainty. From leaving Goldman Sachs to create Venture for Canada to my experiences in COVID to uncertainties in college. I weave in a lot of personal stories, but I also talk about like a friend who he started at Teach for America as a teacher in the States after college, and then pivoted to do coding boot camps, and now works at Microsoft in AI.
Wow.
And I share this in the sense of just like that's an anecdote about how I think careers are more adaptable than they ever kind of were. And
You're you're
yeah,
correct. I agree with that. Yeah, it is. I like that. Here, we have to learn because of all this uncertainty and the change, you need to learn how to adapt. And that's kind of how what I'm taking away from your story. You adapted and you're helping other people. You kind of had to deal with your own internal demons, right? Is that the way I should say demons? But I'm just trying to be funny. But you're helping other people. That is what the younger generation or the younger entrepreneurs need because there's so much uncertainty out there. And I think embracing who you are is so helpful. And we all have a hidden skill set. So what do you think would help people find that hidden skill set that they have, that they don't realize that they have? What do you think recommend to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say a few things that I would recommend for people in order to find their skill sets. So I think first off is like, what are things that other people tell you that you're really good at?
Okay.
And sometimes we might be oblivious to the fact that we're really good at something, but other people can be more aware of us than like self-awareness for most people is limited. And so I would first recommend go out and ask people, like, what are the things that are competitive advantages that you have in the world that other people maybe don't have? The second thing I would recommend is to sort of think about like what are things that you love doing. Generally, I find not always, but the things that we love doing are things that we're often good at. So there's often a correlation between doing what you love and doing what you're good at, but to be clear, that's not always the case. And I'd say the third thing is like reflecting on like even like what are things that you loved to do when you were like a teenager or like kid and that you could just spend hours and hours kind of doing. And often I think that that's like correlated with what you're really good at like in life. Like so for me like I loved like selling candy and like doing these things as like a kid like when I was like 12. And it correlates to me being older, that I love doing entrepreneurship, or I participated a lot in competitive debate across Canada when I was in high school and middle school. And now I'm doing these podcasts and writing a book. So sometimes when you think about think it is a really valuable to think like what were you doing when you were 12 or 13 and that you love to do and how does that apply to what you're good at now?
I like that point, referencing back to when you're younger, what you enjoy doing, and you're not gonna kind of goes back to like burnout, maybe. You'll be less likely to burn out, correct, if you're doing something that you are doing something that makes you happy or enjoy. I mean, you can still do it on the side. Some people still have to have a job, but it just depends on their situation. And you're very like you listen to your instincts, and that's why you're here today. And you probably have what's the word influenced more people than you realize. People have talked to you personally, some have not. Just you know, even just reading you on LinkedIn or whatever, and just your book. I think books. I love books, by the way, and that's why I got involved in it, Scott. Growing up, got out of college, and I got into a job with one of the bigger publishers, big, publishers. And I thought that was a big deal, right? But it was, that changed too. And they have a lot more competition because of self-publishing stuff. And there's just so much, we just have to be resilient. Is that the right? That's really what this podcast is examples of being resilient. And you definitely are. And I like the risk that you took. I mean, I like it. I'm one of those people who embraces that, even though I had to be poked a few times to do it, right? Because my gotten into my own business, I was laid off from a corporate job, Scott, right? Unexpectedly, because that's what's happening in the corporate world. And it was a private equity firm that bought the division I was in, and they saw big dollar signs next to my name and other people. So that's kind of how it can happen to older people like me. I should say older. I'm a lot older than you, but that's really what it is. And it was my clients that I was looking for a job. I'm like, I gotta get another job, right? And I had clients that we trust you, and they're the ones that shared with me all the stuff that I didn't think about, and they're the ones that convinced me. And you sound like you're a very compassionate person, and I think that builds trust too. I think trust is critical in growing a business, building that with your clients no matter what it is. And you have very articulate. I like how calm your demeanor is. It's I'm just sharing that because we're talking for the first time, but I do like that. And you got to support um, everybody in any way you can. Not doesn't have to be monetarily, correct? It just could be emotionally. Um, so you're also I see something you had mentioned too about the personal advisory board. So what is that? Can you explain what that means?
A mistake a lot of people make in their careers is they place this huge emphasis on having a mentor and that this one mentor will fix all their problems or and that they go to for all of their advice. But the reality is no one person is the best source of advice for every career or life question that you have. And the concept of a personal advisory board, which comes from MIT, is that it's important to have like 6 or 7 different like
Oh,
life advisors.
right.
One could be a mentor who you go to for like overarching kind of questions, but another person could be like a career advisor. So that's somebody who you might be maybe work with really closely in your industry. Uh, there's opportunity to you could have a workplace advisor, like someone who you directly work with, who's like a peer that you go to for like advice and support because different people based on how they know you are going to give you advice in different kinds of ways. So I really recommend people consider creating like a personal advisory board from themselves rather than just having 1 or 2 mentors. And one thing that's important is this concept of a personal advisory board doesn't mean uh, having a formal board of meeting where they sit and they give you most of these people won't know each other, but it's about in your own head thinking around what is this personal advisory board that exists and how can each person give you individualized advice that helps you in a given situation.
Yeah, it helps you get over your doubting yourself a lot on certain things. And I like that perspective because people see you as different ways, right, based on your relationship that you have with them. And they can give you some honest advice too. And it won't be hurtful because I should say hurtful, but because they know you. And again, it has goes back to the trust situation. That is something that I won't share something with somebody that I don't trust, correct? And
Yeah, totally.
it also goes back to, I think it helps keep your, I'm a big believer, talking about this now more about morality, being, we have to be moral, right, in what we do. That's just me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's increasingly, I think, essential for people to be guided by like integrity and morality. In a different part of the book, I talk about the importance of thinking about what are your values. And for me, there are 4 values that stand out: integrity, inclusiveness, ambition, and curiosity. And in a world where things can change kind of overnight and things evolve really quickly, thinking a lot about what are your values and ultimately making big and little decisions as guided by your values is really, really important.
That's a good point. I like the little steps because that you're more likely to stick with something if you do it in small steps rather than massive changes. And sometimes we can't help a massive change, but how you respond to it is important. I love that you brought up the word curiosity because that is something that I think is really helpful. Is asking the questions, the right. It just being curious just helps solve problems in general. It's really being it's not reacting, right? You're listening again to your personal advisory board. You're maybe you asking them questions and they're going to give you some feedback, right? It's just amazing that I'm glad that people like you are out there in this world, and it's a it's just so important to share stories like yours. And I love your again your personality. Is I I would trust you just because you're very open, right? Is that the right word? Open. And so where can, one more thing, question I got, what is 1 or 2 takeaways for those that are listeners, what you can give them based on your experience on, I just want to focus on the self-compassion part because I think that a lot of people disregard that.
On the self-compassion piece of things, there's 3 core parts of the way of how you can be more self-compassionate. The first is talking to yourself like you would talk with a friend. So a lot of times we're so hard on each other that, or on ourselves, that we can have this really negative self-talk. And I think talking to yourself in a tender way is a really important part of fostering self-compassion. A second piece that's really important is recognizing our common humanity. That in essence, like we all like suffer, and that in many ways, suffering is the thing that like bonds us together. And when you recognize that your suffering is not just you, but you're part of this broader thing, I think that you can be a lot more self-compassionate. And the third is having just mindfulness and being aware of how you're feeling like in the moment. And that's something that's really important also in fostering self-compassion. Just being aware of like, hey, being really hard on myself right now. Essentially, if you're not mindful, it's hard to be able to even be aware of when you're not being self-compassionate. And to answer the other part of your question in terms of where folks can learn more about me, you can check out my website, and that's by checking out stirrett.com. So it's STI, two R's, E, two T's.com. And that's my personal website. You can follow me on Substack at Scott Stirrett, and I send out an email once a month with the top kind of findings that I found from that the last month. It goes out to around 1,300 people,
Wow.
60% open rates, great community of people. And then the third is you can check out the Uncertainty Advantage on Amazon. It goes on sale in the US on September 16th and in Canada on August 19th. It's also available at Barnes& and Noble and at independent bookstores across Canada and the US.
I have one more question for you. So, what do you do before we end this to be in the moment? You like mentioned mindfulness, be in the moment. I like to be walk my dogs. Could that remind? That's something I do. What is something that you do, Scott, to help you be in the moment?
It's a great question. It's something I can sometimes struggle with at different points. Like I am definitely someone who can live, I'd say, a lot in the future. So I'm definitely more of a tendency towards anxiety than sadness. But for me, a few things. I think one is running outside
Yes,
without headphones and just like being out in nature. And yeah, I love that. Like hiking, running, just being in nature with not listening to anything.
that is definitely something that we have in common. And I like to run in nature. And then again, I don't run with my dogs, but walking them they stop and sniff everything. And you're like, okay. And so you're just looking around you. That's kind of that's important. We need to fit. You don't have to have a dog, guys, but at least go outside. And for those that are listening, I'll include the links that Scott mentioned in the description. And I'm so glad to have you on. You're very, very inspirational. And I'm going to share this, talk about this with so many people. Trust me.
Thank you very much for the kind words. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much.